Hello and welcome to Faculty for a Future Communicating the Complex Crisis event. My name is James Dyke. I'm an academic lead at Faculty for a Future. Thus far, there is really quite limited understanding, even in an academic context, of what this crisis is. And certainly when you're thinking about communicating the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the potential migration crisis to wider society through mainstream media, there's very, very little understanding of just how entangled and complex and dangerous our current situation is.
It's a systemic crisis with almost overwhelming array of self-reinforcing phenomena. One of the things that we in the media can do in parallel with what you're doing is to give more airtime to that question of how do the systems change, not just how do we make these little incremental adjustments, but what kind of big radical transformational action needs to happen at a systems level.
Much of it is just, this is the issue, we're screwed, which is fair, right? But then it's so much more than that. I mean, there's so much more than that. Go beyond the environment and science desks with your climate stories, because there's stories about economics and agriculture and media and arts and culture and everything else.
It's a crisis of conversation as much as it is like the physical crises that we see sort of manifest around us. And it's a particular type of conversation that we're not really having, and that's in our communities. But the conversations that we're having as a community and the decision makers, how they're having conversations, where is that? How are we engaging with that together and helping each other process that?
The central motivation for all of this is to identify and support a new generation of academic communicators.
The real focus of this toolkit that you'll hear Josephine speak to in a moment as well is to help you make decisions about how it is you communicate, and to do so confidently and clearly in a way that means that you can maintain your integrity and credibility as a scientist. Now, the concern with all of these sorts of communications is, you could sort of boil it down to, that's not what I said. There are lots of different factors that go into influencing what it is people hear you saying, and that might be quite different to what it is you intend for them to hear. And so I separated these out into like the voice, the content, and the audience, but there's so many different things that play into how people hear what you say. And with these different factors, there are different ways in which you can have more or less control.
Where we're at now is basically it's been reviewed by a small group of communications experts, academics, journalists, and feedback has been really positive. We're basically now working towards publishing a beta version of this toolkit in a few weeks that we then hope to co-develop with your help and the help of our wider community. The toolkit contains 5 approaches. They're not prescriptive and relevant to all academics. First up, share the real world motivations that led you into academia in the first place. We're not talking about discussing politics here or specific policy advocacy necessarily. We're instead talking about something much broader. So being open about the kinds of fundamental widespread feelings and values that do in fact motivate research. Next, so being open about the limitations of your area of expertise. So this approach is about reminding academics, your expertise is crucial, but it's only one part of a much, much bigger puzzle. Thirdly, platform others. This approach is about encouraging academics to pass the baton on to other expert voices, including those that are currently missing from the debate. Next, make connections. Talk about how your work interacts with the wider world. It's about relating to your audience as a human being, perhaps rather than as an academic or an expert. Last but not least, use real-world examples of resilience to bring the complexity of crises to life. Talk about, how this is actually happening across the world, but do so in a way that engenders hope.
I would encourage academics also to think about communication really in 2 ways that may seem a little contradictory. Sort of a combination of think about communication as a longer-term process. If it doesn't work well today, there's always tomorrow, and be prepared for those times when it seems like there may be a teachable moment when suddenly a good deal of progress can be made in a short time.
As a journalist, I'm standing on a very shaky platform already because there's so many flaws in my own system. You know, I don't want it to sound like, oh, you know, you academics should be doing X, Y, and Z to, you know, solve the problem. I'm not approaching it like that. You know, I really feel, I really kind of sense this as a kind of shared endeavor.
One of the things we're trying to do is to restructure the way journalism works around climate change, trying to challenge metrics, on challenge practices, newsroom structures, and also try to like open up new ways to understand who is an expert and who isn't an expert.
People's assemblies of small groups of people are being held in different parts of the developing world. And some of my researchers have been involved with this and came out with some very startling stories, which otherwise probably wouldn't have become visible to us. And we've not been able to get this out into the media.
This is exactly the kind of stories that we're hoping to platform. What are these real local stories that can give meaning to this complexity of these crises?
Thanks so much for coming. Please, one thing that you have to do, if you haven't already, please do visit our website, facultyforafuture.org. If you haven't already, sign up, join our mailing list, learn how you can get more involved, learn how you can begin to use our toolkit and some of the other wonderful things that we're going to be doing over the following months.